So that's really the only slide I'm going to show you, just to give a high-level view of what we're going to talk about here. So we talked about several ways of getting information into the system. The first one I'm going to show you is just simply from email. I'm going to craft a new email to our demo account. And this is just like if a vendor were to send you guys a invoice from their ERP system. They would attach it in here. And so you can see we have a couple of formats. We have a Word document and a PDF document. OCR engines are typically optimized for PDFs or TIFFs, but anything that comes in a Word format, our software can translate into a PDF or a TIFF image. So Word documents, Excel documents, PowerPoints, if you happen to get it, can all be sort of assimilated into an OCR-able format and brought into the system. So I'm going to go ahead and send that. So it's just going from my account here into our demo account, and so you can see that it shows up in our inbox. Our software is going to monitor this inbox, and it's going to automatically pull this information into the demonstration. And so that's going to take just a minute, and I'm going to hop back over to our virtual machine while that happens. So while that's processing in the background, what you're seeing now is called the Kofax Batch Manager. And this batch manager is sort of a supervisor's view into the system. So if you had multiple documents going through the system or multiple batches of documents going through the system, this is where you would be able to see everything that's being tracked through the software. So we just sent an email in, and it's going to just take a minute for that to show up. The other way, and the more traditional way, is through scanning a document. So I'm just going to create a new batch of documents. And this is really just telling the software to get it ready for a batch of invoices. So one of the nice things about the Kofax software is that it is an enterprise platform. It can handle more types of documents than just invoices. We have several folks that may start in the AP department, but then move over to the AR department, human resources, legal department, anywhere that there's document-driven processes or scan and archive that needs to happen. The Kofax software can accommodate sort of multiple batches or types of documents into the system and deliver those to the different systems that need to use them or keep them. So we'll want to pay particular attention to the queue and the status. So when I created that batch of documents, we're just in a ready status for scan. And so I'm going to go ahead and process that. And this is what a operator would see as they're getting ready to, they open the invoices from the mail. They've prepped them, they've removed the staples, taped down any torn edges, dropped them on the scanner, and then here is where they'll actually be pulled into the software. So I would just hit scan all, and in the normal course of scanning, the documents will be pulled in. I'm going to just grab some images here. Excuse me one second while I find where I put those guys. Oh, sorry. Okay. So I just imported a few images here, but these invoices were scanned with VRS technology, which is what Dave alluded to earlier. So the virtual rescan technology is something that Kofax is actually founded on when they were a young company back in the mid-1980s. They made their name for connecting scanners to the slower PCs and creating a sort of a pretty image in a fast way. So they've built themselves on that technology, and that's really lent itself now to the OCR technology. When you can create a pretty image out of a piece of paper, the OCR technology has a much better opportunity to read the information correctly, which means that you get a higher level of automation when you extract the data. So you can see here that we just brought in about 8 invoices, and there are different formats, different vendors. We have some that are portrait, some that are landscape, and certainly all of different information located in different places. And we call that sort of semi-structured. In other words, we know that there's an invoice number, an invoice date that we want to capture. We're just not exactly sure where that is on the page. So the scan module automatically connects to whatever scanner is available to it. It pre-selects the scan settings So there's no manual intervention there. It can automatically connect to your scanner. Say, let's make this 300 DPI. It automatically rotates the images as they come in so that they're in landscape or portrait mode, which really reduces the amount of preparation that the operator has to do, as well as speeds up the scanning process itself. Once everything is sort of ordered like you want it, we close the batch, and you'll see us come back to the batch manager. So a couple of things have happened. One is that the email has come in that I sent earlier, and then the scan documents that I just sent through are ready for the KTM server. So the KTM server stands for Kofax Transformation Modules, which is really just the OCR server that we use. And it runs as a sort of standard Windows service in the background, so the operators never really see it. But you can see here that once it picks up that set of information, it becomes in progress. And in the background, I can just show you sort of a visual representation. The software is going through the documents that we scanned and extracting the information. So when documents come in via email, it's really the first opportunity that you have to see those documents in your organization. And so we like to put those into the quality control module first. And I'm just kicking that off. And the quality control module looks a whole lot like the scan module. It's, in fact, the same module. It's just a sort of a first look in the system. So you may have vendors that will send you one document, and that one document may have 3 invoices in it, or you may need to split invoices out as necessary. And so this provides a very simple interface for manipulating the batch of documents that come in via email. So you can drag multiple documents together. You can split documents apart very easily. You can drag and drop them back into the right place. So it really reduces the amount of any sort of rescanning or asking folks to send another copy in because you can manipulate the batch into the structure that you want before it goes any further in the process. So for example, here we had a blank page that was just sort of superfluous, and I'm going to delete that and just leave this one. So you can see here, this was the Word document, and when Word documents come in, they come in with a great amount of clarity, and it's going to really assist the OCR engine in extracting that data. This is the PDF that came in, and you can see that it was a scanned PDF. So just like if we scanned them in, once I've structured the batch the way I want it, I can just hit close. And so you'll see here that this quality control will turn into the OCR server, and then in just a minute the OCR server will pick that up and pull the information off. So once the documents are in the system and the OCR has taken place, it's now time to show it to an operator to correct any mistakes or business or thresholds that may not have been passed or business rules that need to be reviewed. So all this happens in our validation module. And this is a configurable module, so what you're seeing here is just sort of a basic interpretation of what most folks want to see out of their invoice data extraction. But it's certainly configurable, and there's as you can tell from the slide presentation, there's lots of options that we can add in here. On the right-hand side is just a representation of the image. On the far left-hand side is a slide out of the batch content, and this is just sort of how the documents were presented during scan time. You can see anything with a question mark is asking for an operator to review it. Anything that is just plain means that the software read that information, it passed our thresholds, passed our business rules, and an operator doesn't need to review it. You can navigate through here. I'm going to go ahead and click on the first page one just so we can show you one that went through automatically. So in the middle section here is the data that was extracted from the invoice, and we have that broken out into 3 tabs. So please keep in mind this is completely configurable. We can make this however, whatever suits your individual organization. On the far left-hand side, we have what's called invoice information, which is just really address information. And there's a sort of a number of ways we capture this information off of a document, especially the remit information. we, as the advanced capture team, have made some enhancements to the Kofax software that differentiates between the different invoices, or excuse me, the different addresses that you may see on an invoice. And we break those down into remit addresses, ship to addresses, bill to addresses. Sometimes there's especially on internationals, there's consignees, or there may be an address that's sort of arbitrary, which we call a corporate address that may not have any label associated to it. We identify those addresses and then use the Kofax fuzzy technology, which is sort of a Google search, if you will. We zero in on the information that you want. We send that information over to your vendor master file, and then the Kofax software searches your vendor master file using that fuzzy search to bring back the most likely candidate. It works quite well most often. If there's any question about what it picked up, we have a number of ways to get at your vendor information. So we never actually want to take what was written on the invoice. We actually want to match it to your vendor master file so we know where to pay it. So just like with IBM or Oracle, right, there's, it's not good enough just to identify it as an IBM or Oracle invoice. There may be 30 different places in the United States that those guys want you to remit the information, and so we need to actually base it off of the address and the vendor itself, which is what that fuzzy search does very well. It uses the entire address and not just the vendor name to find out where you want to remit to. So the options that we have a quick alternatives button here. And so the alternatives button, if you have multiple entries into your database, will show you how well or how confident they were that it found the right one. So you see we have a couple of major electrics here, one on La Paloma Road and one on East Felix. You'll also notice that we have a duplicate entry of the same address in the software. So it actually knows that this is a duplicate entry and that this entry was significantly higher confidence than the next available entry. And so it marked everything in green and said, hey, major electric on La Paloma Road is the one that we want. In addition to that, there's a fuzzy lookup, and this is sort of the Google interface. So if I was to type in major, you can see that it'll bring up all the entries in the vendor master file. But not just major, it actually searches on anything in the database. So if I were to type in the Skyline as the city, you can see that it'll bring everything back up as Skyline. The nice thing about the software too is if I mistype Skyline, I put an E in instead of NE. Excuse me. The software takes that into account. It drops the confidence a little bit, but it still brings you back the most likely suspect so that you can quickly select the vendor if it didn't catch it. The other thing that we can do is there's point and click technology. So if I cleared out the remit fields, let's say it missed everything altogether, and I just click on the image and say, hey, this is the company's called Major, and I do a lookup, then this is a sort of a traditional ODBC lookup into your database, and you can just select the one that's the right one. Likewise, if I were to clear those and select address 1 as this part of the address, if there was only one result that it finds in the database, it's going to go ahead and populate that without you having to look at the drop-down box. Once we've found the correct vendor, we also have the ship to address. So ship to address here is really just based on how some of our users operate inside the system. The ship to address can be used to link back to either a store or a remote site that may have purchased the goods, especially for non-PO invoices. So for purchase orders, right, you typically have most of the information. You have the buyer information and where it's going to go, the PO number, and it's sort of easy to match those up and make sure that the coding was correct based on what was received. But for non-PO invoices, you probably need someone to validate that that what they ordered was actually received and approve the invoices and maybe even code the invoices. So the trick is if all your invoices come to a central location and you have a sort of a dispersed area of folks that are buying things, how do you get that information back out to the people who bought it? A lot of times that can be driven by the ship to address, which is why it's one of the things we demonstrate. So that based on the ship to ID, you can either associate a name or a person, a business or a group with that ship to ID. And so in a workflow system, you can route this information out for approval and coding. Oh, went too far. On the middle tab is the invoice data, and this is where the particulars are picked up, such as the invoice number, invoice date, PO number, and the dollar information, as well as any line item information that may be on the document. So we're doing a number of things here, especially, as I mentioned before, we're doing balancing. So if I were to add a dollar of tax that didn't exist, we're actually balancing the header information here against the sum of the line items, which is just this one line item. And if they don't balance, it's going to tell you in the bottom that we have a balancing issue. So similarly, if I were to double the quantity here, we're also balancing against the row on PO documents. So quantity times unit price plus or minus the discount percent needs to equal the extended amount, or we're going to show it to an operator because there's likely an issue. When everything is in balance, it all greens up, as I say, and the document can move on. And we'll see a couple of other issues as we go through here. One last thing to draw your attention to would be the hidden fields. Hidden fields are fields that we can use in the background to facilitate your workflow. So we can identify, without a user having to interface with it, what type of document it is. If there's an exception code, you'll see this later on, we can set things like the PO wasn't recognized, or there was a math error, or maybe there needs to be some vendor maintenance. The vendor didn't exist. So by setting these types of exception codes, when it gets to the workflow can use that information to automatically route your document to the proper place, so that you may not have to bother a store manager before the vendor is set up correctly or the PO is verified. We also do a number of database lookups in the background. So in this one, you'll see a PO verified. You'll see a true and false as we go through here. Let me go ahead and hit enter here. Didn't pop up. Really only said it when it's false, but when the PO is verified, it means that it did a lookup, and the PO is actually found in your PO database, and so we can pass that along. Is it a credit memo or not? This is false. And then a number of other things like the validation user ID, who was validating this document, and then there may be things that we're setting based on the information in the document, like invoice currency. We may get from the vendor master, or terms, things of that nature. So a lot of information that's captured in the foreground and in the background. I'm going to hit OK on that document. So this is really where we started on document 3. 1 and 2 passed all our thresholds. And so we started on 3 here, and it just stopped us at the PO number, which is blank. And this is what we call a soft stop. And so what we're doing here is just stopping the operator, saying, hey, for this particular customer, they tend to expect a PO. If it's not there, we just want to validate that it's not there. And an operator would just hit enter. And then that would be the end of this document. So on non-PO documents, it should be also important to note that since we don't have line item information, we're actually balancing then against the subtotal. So we capture the subtotal and the total amount, and if those don't balance, then we stop an operator and ask them to look at the math. If the math is right, like it was in this case, you just save the document and then you move on. So looking at our batch content, we fixed number 3 there, and then we skip down to number 6. So in this case, we actually found the PO number on the document, and if you look, you can validate what we recognized against what was on the document itself and see that it was correct. But in the background, we performed a PO lookup, and we didn't find it in the PO database. And so in this case, we may want to capture all the information. Maybe the PO hasn't been created yet, or the invoice came in early, and we can notify someone in workflow that it's there. So again, the operator would just validate that that was correct, and then they can move along. You'll also notice down here that we captured a good amount of line item information. So the line item information can be captured whether it's 1 line or 3 lines or 10 pages of lines, and it does that automatically. This uses a learning technology. So if, for example, we were to, I'm just going to go ahead and erase the entire table. If the software for some reason missed the table, excuse me, you can actually train it by telling it where the different pieces of information are. So I'm going to say that's the article code, here's where the quantity is, unit price, and extended amount. And so by training it on the information you want to capture on the first row, we can actually click a button here and it'll go through the rest of the document, whether that be just these 3 lines or on another document, 4 pages and 150 lines. It'll grab all that information automatically based on the operator training the first row. So again, in order to make sure it's correct, we're balancing the extended amount, 1, 2, 3, against the total amount, 1, 2, 3, and when that lines up, we know that the invoice is in balance and we captured it correctly. So you can see here in the background, in this case, because the PO wasn't able to be verified, it was false. We actually set the exception code of PO maintenance, and so when this moves on to workflow, somebody will, or the workflow system can use that information to automatically route it to the right place. So in this case, we've moved along through the batch content. Now we're just on number 7. We captured the invoice number correctly, the invoice date. You can notice that if we rope over the information for the date and we hit enter, it'll turn it into month, day, 4-year format. The PO number was found and verified. And so in this case, actually, it's just that the quantity and unit price don't equal the extended amount. And in this case, we'll find that the vendor that submitted this invoice actually did their calculations incorrectly. And so we have a couple of ways we can handle this. Either the operator can correct it manually, or you can simply force the field through. And then in the background, we can set the exception code saying that the math is, needs to be reviewed. So that was sort of it for this batch of 8 documents. We only had to correct a few things. Once everything is greened up, it's going to say that everything is valid. Do we want to close the batch? We say yes, and we're back to the batch manager. So after the validation, there's a learning service, and what the learning server is actually how the accuracy is gained in the Kofax technology. So sort of in the old days, you would have to draw a box around a certain format, and then the data would have to be inside of that box for you to OCR it. Later on came sort of a anchor target search where you used regular expressions to try to find perhaps the word invoice total, and then you would look either to the top or the right or the bottom using that algorithm to find the data that you wanted. So it helped pinpoint things in a semi-structured environment better. Kofax has taken that a step further with learning technology. It actually uses where you click on the document and learns the thumbprint of what each document looks like, or the geometry on that invoice. And then if new invoices come in and they match that thumbprint or match that same geometry, it actually remembers where you clicked on information previously, and it automatically learns how to extract that document, so that as you use the software over time, it becomes smarter and smarter and increases its ability to extract information with less user input. The advanced capture team has actually created a pretty large knowledge base of documents that are sort of pre-trained, and we anytime we engage with the customer, we start with that knowledge base that we created, and then the customer's invoices obviously will have some that we've never seen before. Those get added to the training mix, and in a very short amount of time you reach sort of the point of diminishing returns with your OCR accuracy. The last step in the process after the software is learned and made the next batch smarter is just to export that information, and again, that's just sort of a background process that I'll kick off. It packages up the information and the images, and it sends it along to the next system, whether that's your ERP system or a workflow system, or both at the same time. And then when it's done, you can see that it cleaned itself up, and it's ready for the next batch of documents. So the software itself requires very little maintenance from a database standpoint. The only information that was retained would be reporting information, so that you can do historical reporting on the documents that you received, the status of how well the OCR is doing, or maybe some user productivity reporting. So that's the front to back process. One extra thing I want to show you here. So this is the email batch that we haven't validated yet. So in addition to sort of a client server, there's also a thin client component to the validation. So you'll notice that the thin client version looks a whole lot like the thick client version, just the slight difference that the batch catalog is on the right. So I hit it too fast. Sorry about that. I moved it along too quickly. Just going to back it up here. Try to open that again here. So this is live stuff. So you'll notice on the right-hand side is just the batch catalog. These are the two documents that we brought in via email. And then on the left-hand side, we have the same tabs, the same functionality to grab the invoice information, the invoice data, and the hidden fields. All the same calculations are made here as they are in the thick client version. And so this is especially handy. We have folks that do validation all over the world. So we have customers that may have either scanning facilities or stores in Latvia or APAC, EMEA, South America, North America, and they actually want to consolidate their scanning sources into one location and then redistribute the information back out to the folks that actually speak the language or the folks that actually ordered the goods. And so that's easily done using a thin client technology, at least more easily done than it is using sort of a thick client technology, although there is an answer for that. So same here, once everything's greened up, we can close the batch. We go back to our batch manager. It's going to ready itself for learning again, and I'm going to go ahead and kick that off manually. And that's going to take just a second to complete. They have sort of an intermediary queue. Some backends only accept bitonal, and so in that case we can convert color to bitonal. And then finally the export queue. Kick that off manually, and you'll see that the documents go through the system. The system cleans itself up, and it's ready for the next batch of documents. So that was a couple of batches of documents through the Kofax system. The OCR technology, the rules that we've applied, the additions that the advanced capture team has made to enhance the accuracy of the software, as well as enhance the rules that come sort of out of the box with Kofax to differentiate between the different types of addresses that we've seen, the learning of the technology, how it learns, and then ultimately exporting that information into your ERP system or into a third-party workflow system for approval and payment.
All right, thanks, Todd.
Mm-hmm. So this time, I guess we'll turn it back to Dave here.